I'm trying to think back to where I like stumbled across you. I'm sure it was social media. I don't know through what avenue. But and I had been
Yeah,
following
yeah.
Sharon McMahon, but I think I followed you before a year ago. So I know you were on one of her podcasts.
Yeah, I think so.
And but
Yep.
then somehow I found you and I was like, "Oh, she has some interesting things to say. I feel like we have some things in common." And then you had posted something or said something and I thought, "Oh, she lives by me. She's practically my neighbor. Your town is just a little bit south of where we live." It's like, "Well, where did they go to church?" I felt like we had some things in
That's
common.
amazing.
Just with like faith journey, and I thought someday I will
Sure.
sit down and talk to Lauren and she's going to be my friend one way or another. So
Yes.
here we are.
Yes, yes, yes. I love it. I love meeting people that are like basically my neighbors online. Like it's easier to set up a
It
Zoom than it is a
is.
coffee these
And
days. It's
with
crazy.
kids and work and all the schedules, sometimes you just do
Yeah,
that. Plus, you're a night owl. If you guys follow Lauren on
I am.
Instagram, you may wake up to stories from her that like fill up, like she has exceeded. She's talking in the night to us, and we wake up. You have basically been podcasting on Instagram, is what I'm saying, for several years. And now you're launching your own
Once
this month. It just makes so much sense.
I'm excited to finally like solidify what we're doing in a bit more of a formal way. But yeah, Instagram has been a fun way to connect with people, and midnight is the only
I
time I
know.
get by myself. So it's just where right now in life I can be alone with, my work and my thoughts, and that's, I don't know,
Yeah.
that's kind of my
So how
happy
did you end up
place.
in Columbia, Tennessee in 2019, was it?
Yes, it was 2019. So my family, my husband and I and our kids had been living abroad. We were living in Southeast Asia, and we knew that it was time to transition back. Several things were going on. Visas were a challenge for a variety of reasons. And then one of our kiddos was just in need of some medical treatment. And then, it just raising kids in very transitional lifestyles is tricky. And if you talk to people who have lived abroad, there's this love that you have for that lifestyle of, oh man, this week we're
Yeah.
going to the Philippines to go to, I don't know, it becomes this chip on your shoulder that you wear sometimes. And so admitting that there are definitely some downsides to not having
Yeah.
stability for your kids, that they don't have one place that they call home. I mean, my 9-year-old can pinpoint 7 or 8 houses
Wow.
that she has called home in her short life. So that has an effect on kids. So anyways, we finally we finally gave in and moved back home, and we were trying to look anywhere but here, and Columbia just found us, and it is just a lovely town, great people, courageous people who want to have really hard conversations and figure out how to live in community here together. And it just really roped us in, and we love it. Absolutely love it. We look closer to Nashville quite often, and just I don't know, can't pull the trigger. We
Yeah, I
really
mean, the
love
cost
living
gets
here.
higher as you get closer to Nashville. There's not a lot of yards available. If you want a house, you can get a house,
True.
but maybe not in a
Very true.
yard. Um, and
Yeah.
I know people love Columbia. People that live there, they just have an
Yeah.
attachment to the area that is different than some of the other more. Columbia feels a little
It's
more
true. They're
rural.
very loyal to the
Um,
town.
or
It
as
does.
farther, if you go a little bit farther north, very suburban, very transitional. Although so many people have moved to the Middle Tennessee area that Columbia is full of transplants as well, but not as many as
True.
you would see like in a Franklin or Brentwood area. Where Columbia, you're going to get a
Right.
mixture of people that have been there forever and those that have just showed up
Uh-huh.
from who knows where all over the United States and the world. It's really interesting.
It is interesting. My husband's originally from here, so we're not completely outsiders. So we've got, long-term relationships here, but you have to commit. If you're going to live an hour south of Nashville, you've got to commit. And we love the people who have
Yeah.
made
I mean,
that
the good
commitment to
news
be
is not
here.
everything is an hour away.
It's
Well,
true.
your
That's
job
true.
has
That's true.
been a bit of a drive, I would imagine, with teaching at the university. That's a lot of
It has.
hours in the car. But what I want to ask you is, you arrived in 2019. The world is crazy. Like, things were starting
Mhm.
on fire, I
Mhm.
believe, in that time
Mm.
politically.
They were
Um,
blazing, yes.
there was a lot of rumbles in the Christian evangelical world, the whole Christian faith community, of like some big fractures happening, a lot of conversations happening with people, and looking at, the effect that Trump had on a lot of churches, and people taking for granted sort of like how they would vote. And of course, certain Christians vote certain ways. You land here sort of as that's heating up a little bit more. And then the pandemic happens. It's 2020, and your husband's
Mhm.
a family practice doctor. Is that right? And
That's
you live
right,
in a very, Columbia is wonderful, but also Middle Tennessee is, it's very, very conservative. And there are a lot of people that aren't really interested, and they really feel suspicious of health precautions, and it just become
Mhm.
very polarized. And I'm just wondering, tell me what that was like for you transitioning back into a church in America, a community here, finding your
Mhm.
place when all of that is swirling around. This could probably be a whole series, but wherever you want to take that.
It's Yeah, I it's interesting. It's a lot easier to love a place that you don't know all
Yeah.
of its dirt, right? So when you travel and you go somewhere short term, you see the beautiful parts, the parts that everyone puts out front, the beautiful restaurants or the pretty streets or the touristy attractions. And even though we lived in Southeast Asia for 5 years, we still it was not home to us long term, right? We were still seeing a lot of the beautiful parts of it. When you are from somewhere, you know it's junk. And I've said, it's sometimes harder to love the places that you come from because you know all of the dirt that's there. And so I really grieved moving back to the United States and tried not to land in the South. To be
Mm,
perfectly transparent, I grew up here. I'm originally from West Tennessee, and I knew what was here. I knew what I was coming back to, and I knew the polarization that was happening in the United States. And I just did not want, I was not ready to jump into that. And so I had to really prepare. I pre grieved for a good year before we moved back, knowing this was kind of the trajectory, asking God, like, Lord, please give me a heart
mm,
for my own people and my own culture the same way you have given me a heart for a place around the world. If I can learn another language, a tonal language, if I can learn to love a people that I have almost nothing in common with, surely I can find a way to love a, a, a culture that I know, a language that I speak. And so I tried to center that as really my heart posture moving back, but it's hard to know really what the political temperature is when you're only seeing things on social media.
yeah.
So I wasn't sure really how were conversations being had around the table? How were people engaging with each other? And it turns out that social media was a pretty good indicator of the suspicion that we had of each other in the United States. And that suspicion has led to really a
Mhm.
breakdown of relationships and a lot of grief around those relationships. And so, what my husband and I have really tried to step into coming back here is asking better questions and being more curious about how people think, how they arrived at the conclusions that they did, and how they feel about politics,
Mhm.
healthcare, church, all of those big things that are a huge part of who we are. Asking those questions and being more curious, and then positioning ourselves in a way that allows people to be curious about us as well and promotes conversation instead of shutting down relationships. And we've tried to do that in our own
Mm.
personal walks every day, whether that's in the classroom or the clinic or around the family table. But online seemed to be a really critical place to do that as well, because that's where a lot of us
Yeah,
spend our
yeah.
time, right? Is the device in our hands. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey for sure, figuring out how to show up and be authentic in all of those
I
places.
love that. So you prayed. That is so interesting to me to hear that you prayed that God would help you have a heart for a place that you would probably, many of us take for granted. It's easy to think, like you said, like, we're going to go abroad. I'm going to learn the language. I'm going to be humble. I'm going to put in the time and build the relationship and have that relational capital without like making big asks that could rock someone's world. It Was it hard to do that? Like how soon did you feel like God was like saying, "All right, Lauren, you asked, I'm answering."
Well, I feel like he'd been pushing on me for quite a while. If you are in the mission space at all, or have spent time in around missionaries, people who call themselves missionaries, you will find a lot of people who are really trying to escape something in their own culture back home, or there's a lot of
Mm,
escapism that happens, and so uh, you know the Lord he just kept calling me back, kept calling me back, kept calling me back. And he said, or I felt, that if I can't love the place and the people that I come from, then I haven't
mm,
learned how to love. And it just felt like another invitation to sanctification, another opportunity to understand his heart for my roots, where I come from, and what the Lord was doing here specifically, because goodness knows that if I believed he was pursuing the hearts of people in other nations around the globe, he was absolutely pursuing people here as well. And so trying to figure out where God was on mission in my community, in a different context than what I was used to. I mean, I looked for jobs in every urban city that I could. I was really hoping that something would open up in some type of urban housing, complex, or something that, looked really cool, like a really cool
yes.
ministry location. And we landed on a street here in an affluent part of our town, and it gutted me. And God was like, Lauren, can you please stop feeling like you have to martyr yourself to look like you have this amazing ministry going on, because your kids are
Yeah.
unraveling. So why don't you give them a stable home and figure out how to receive that and find other ways to connect. And so that's where I'm sitting now, and it's been a bit of a knock to my own pride, maybe outside of where I usually thrive, I feel like, in connecting with people, but it's been a great
Yeah.
invitation.
If you've ever read, I think, is it Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzero? And he talks
Mm,
about those
hmm.
boundaries and kind of starting with
Yeah.
ministering out of a place of like, what is your family situation boundaries set for you in this time? And I think you're leaning into that, and you're not
Yeah.
going to regret it. It's so hard, so
That's a
hard,
great
but
book.
you're not gonna regret it. I
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you saw yourself in the urban area and you're you resisted that like suburban life, the neighborhood life, and here you are. Here you are. Tell me about the conversations you've been able to have though, as you have been curious. Like you get to be the person that gets to be curious in a neighborhood, with kids riding their bicycles more than like walking to the grocery store.
Yes. So, I mean, prime example, I guess, this was Sunday night. So we went over to some a family friend's house for the traditional New Year's meal, right? So we are eating black eyed peas and hog jaw and all of the things, and we're sitting around, everybody's laughing, and somebody's telling us a birth story, and before I know it, I'm like blabbing about how childbirth is the number one dangerous health risk to women around the world. More women die in childbirth around the world than anything else. And 1 in 40 women die in Laos in childbirth, and how we just don't understand that in the United States. And the whole room is silent. I'm like, I just did it again. I'm so sorry. Here come my depressing statistics. And, that's definitely been a cultural component of trying to figure out how to reach across the culture here, because I don't do a great job of knowing the different types of countertops that
Yeah.
people are wanting in their homes, and how we discuss home improvements and things like that. I'm just not as comfortable in that space, but I can blab to you for hours about the recent statistics from IOM about child labor and and trafficking, and so that's been a learning curve that I'm still on, but it has, I think, provided some curiosity from my neighbors as well to say, wow, how can we open our eyes to a global mindset that we haven't had? And so there's been some growing pains through that, and I've said a lot of awkward things that I wish I could take back, but people are learning how to receive me, and they have been so great to our family. I mean, our family has been in a really tough season, and they have just surrounded us with so much love, so much compassion, and I think in ministry or in faith circles, we get so wrapped up in
Mhm.
wanting to do for other people. We think that ministry is all about depleting ourselves to give to other people, and there's a huge component of that to ministry for sure, but there's a ministry of receiving as well. And if we can't receive good things from other people, then we miss out on community and what it means to be in faith with other people, who are helping complete and perfect our faith
Yeah.
through relationship. And that has been a really unexpected joy and gift of living where we do, and God providing the family that He has through
Yeah,
through
I
our
wanna
faith
ask you
community
about
here.
your faith community because as I've sort of followed you online, um, there's been some changes in how you have approached, like, whether you are in a building with a, like, organized, faith community or whether you're at
Mhm.
home. How what made you decide to do some shifts in that? What does that look like for you or some of the ups and downs of that process?
Yeah, goodness, I love how differently people find ways to express their faith and connect with community as they seek a higher
Mhm.
God. And for us, we were coming back a little bit tattered and torn from a really challenging season abroad. And so we spent about 6 months when we moved back trying to find a faith community that we could plug into, and we were
Yeah,
going to give it our best go at an institutionalized church. um, so this is where I say there's not a wrong way
absolutely.
to connect with people in the way that you find God, through your faith community. We have found that deinstitutionalizing our faith has been a lot more authentic, for us, and a way for us to connect more deeply with people. So we did spend about a year in an organized church here. Great experience, great people, loved it, but we kept having people strike up conversations with us saying, "Where do you guys go to church? We just
Mhm.
can't find anywhere to go." And we're in the
Wow.
Bible Belt with a church literally like I we there are huge churches across the street from us. We are surrounded. So Gavin and I, my husband, we just kept saying, what's going on that people can't find a place to express
Yeah, because
their faith in
there
God
are so many churches, you can't
in
miss them.
community?
Why weren't
Right.
they interested
Can't.
in the church on the corner?
It feels to me that people, and this especially happened during COVID, right? So this is telling from the last couple of years, but when people are needing to be heard, they're needing to be able to express not only a faith in God but also questions about God. They want to be able to serve, they want to be able to be active in their faith. And the larger a church gets, it seems to me that the fewer places there are really for
Mhm.
people to plug in, because you have paid staff, you've got a ministry team that is saying, "You come in
Mhm.
and we will serve you." But there's a core need that we all have
Yeah.
to actually be active in the way that we practice our faith as well. And my sense is that in an institutionalized church, there's fewer places for people to truly plug in authentically, even with small group programs or with different types of ministries in the church. I just think people have found a hard path
Mhm.
to actually being really active in the way that they live out their faith. So it doesn't feel authentic to them. It doesn't feel tangible. And they start to wonder, like, is this really is this just something I'm doing on Sundays? And so what has happened is our living room has become a place for people to explore that. And we have really enjoyed watching multiple families, multiple single individuals come and just sit around the Bible on Sunday afternoons, asking questions and working through a discovery Bible study. And we eat together each week, and they've just become an extension of our family to us. And it's been really beautiful. I don't know,
Yeah.
it's not perfect either. And I don't know what's coming next. We're praying about that as more people are seeking to find a faith community that's as authentic as what we have. So we're praying through that. But that's where we are right now. And being in a living room and living life in a house church for
Yeah.
us has been really great over
Lauren,
the
if
last couple of
somebody,
years.
I bet there's people listening that are like, that sounds wonderful. How do I find those people? How do
Mm.
I find that? And especially if they don't live in Columbia, Tennessee.
Yeah, yeah. I get that question a lot, and I could write a book and I could give you a formula and I could tell you how to
Mhm.
do it, and it would be wrong. It would be wrong for your context, and it would be wrong for your people. And so I think we love we love clear cut step by step, instructions of how to do this. But the reality is that the church is meeting around the world right now in so many
Mhm.
different forms. And the form that you fall into is the form that is a
Mhm.
natural expression of your love for God. And it's taken me a long time to get there because I was raised in a very fundamentalist church culture where we had to do everything just right, and we prayed every Sunday that God would accept our worship
Mhm.
as perfect and pleasing to him. And so, I think it was worshiping with a church in Uganda and seeing how they escorted the women forward to take communion, and sitting in a church on the Burmese border, watching how refugees from Myanmar were offering songs to edify the church on a Sunday. Just different forms that I've seen the church take, to me says, what do you have? What is your skill? What do you have to offer the people who are seeking and hungry for God in your community? And you open your home and you sit together and you say, what do you have to bring? And the church will form out of that. There's tools for sure, and we love using inductive studies. The Discovery Bible Study process has been really beautiful for us and kind of become a part of our DNA. But that's just one tool. There's many ways to sit around a table and
Yeah. What
discover
would you
God
say
together.
to pastors that they really want to have a healthy church? They want to do this the right way. But they're feeling discouraged because they feel like people left when the pandemic
Yeah,
started, and they're not coming back. And they're saying, "Why aren't these people
yeah,
coming back?"
yeah,
And some are asking in really good faith. I think some there's all sorts of emotions about it in different pastors that are like healthy or not healthy, whether they're like angry and frustrated or whether they're just really curious about
mhm,
it. What would you say if you could sit down in a room with these pastors that are saying, "Why aren't they coming back? What do you know? What should I do? Where should I go?"
yeah. I would say, first of all, let yourself off of the hook for being able to be everything to everyone, because a lot of times people in pastoral positions feel a pressure to have the resources for everyone's spiritual needs, and it's impossible. One person cannot meet, and even a ministry team cannot meet all of the needs that someone has in discovering God. And so if a church is trying to have all of the programs just so, and designing these experiences for people, it will be imperfect and it will be incomplete because people are so dynamic and God is so supernatural. So we can't measure that experience for people, and we can't design it perfectly for them because something will throw it off. If there's anything I've learned working with people, it is that you cannot predict what they will say, what they will do, how they will feel, and how they will feel their way back to God. I find a lot of encouragement in Paul's sermon at Mars Hill saying, the Lord is not so distant from us that we can't find our way back to him. So there is for sure a grief of the great falling away, or the great, there's a name for it. I know that people smarter than me in church leadership have framed this, the great decline of people attending the services on a Sunday. But I think step number one is to say, look, God has not stopped pursuing people. And we have to first hope that each person who may not be sitting in a pew on a Sunday morning has just fallen away completely from God. Maybe they are finding him in a more authentic way. The second thing I would say is how can you remain curious about the people who have found their way to your building and ask them, what do you have to give? How do you want to serve? And what people do you have in your network? What passions do you have in your heart? What burdens do you have for our community that you want to serve in? And how can we support that? Because one 65-year-old lady with knitting needles, that was a complete projection of someone 65. I like
It's
to
who
knit
you
and
want to
crochet too.
be
Okay, so
when you're
I've been doing that
65. This
since
is
I
who
was
you want
10.
to be.
This is who I want to be. You know, we were given last week a prayer shawl from a lady at my in-laws church, and she had prayed over that entire shawl as she was knitting it together and wrote the most beautiful prayer to us as a gift. That was a beautiful ministry that my in-laws church did not commission. They didn't say, we're going to have a prayer shawl ministry and this is everyone's going to get, they didn't try to um, measure it and show it. This is just a person who is being faithful to what her skills are and the way that she wants to give. And I think that we need to do more of that in the church in the United States. Get behind and breathe life into individuals in the way that they are ministering instead of designing programs and measuring the outcomes. We've turned church into a bit of a business, and it has failed to connect to people
Yeah,
on a lot
and
of
that's a
levels.
hard thing to hear because a lot of the skills that pastors have been given are in that area. And so it feels like a whole
Hmm.
new, I mean, it feels like going abroad. Like, this is not what I
Yeah.
thought this was going to be. These aren't the people that I thought were going to be showing up. Yeah, it is. It's really,
Yeah.
I feel for these pastors that really want to humbly serve and the ones that are really curious,
Mhm.
especially I was listening. I think you probably have some connection, like through like your teaching and maybe in your background through some of the restoration movement churches. We went
Oh,
to
absolutely.
a church in Franklin, which is associated with a Christian church, non-denomination. I did not grow up in that movement. I grew up in a different denomination. I just thought it was so. I think it's funny, first of all, that all these churches they don't call the name, they don't say their denomination, but they have like the same. They all go to the same colleges and they go to the same conferences.
Girl, that was my
Right,
whole life growing
right.
up.
So
I
I
know
learned
it. I
about
know
the
it very
restoration
well. Yeah.
movement because that it's more in the South
Uh huh.
than in where I grew up in the Twin
Right.
Cities area. Um, but
Hmm.
um, we had an interim pastor after our pastor had to be fired for plagiarizing virtually every sermon that he ever wrote, every word,
Oh
even the
no.
personal stories that he told were
Oh
from
no.
a pastor in
Oh, how
Kentucky
tragic.
or they were Mark Driscoll's. He was just like doing a dramatic reenactment of other people's sermons the entire time he was there, which is crazy.
Oh,
Everything we knew
so
about him
sad.
was actually
Oh,
about someone
tragic.
else. It was weird.
Oh
Um,
my goodness.
anyway, so we
Wow.
ended up with an interim pastor that
Oh no.
is very maybe you know, Rubel Shelley, who has been in the Churches of Christ and the
Yes.
Restoration Movement for a long time, and all he did when he came
Yes.
was pastor us. And he had, like, a series of
Mm.
sermons that he would do when he did interim preaching. And so, it just felt like I don't know what it was. So something about that interim pastor period that felt like, "Oh, this person isn't trying to get anything out of us. This person just wanted to love us."
Mm.
And I had looked to see he's
Mm.
somewhere closer to Nashville now, I think. He's pretty
Hmm.
old, but he's still ministering. It's so he could be retired, right? He could be.
He is, and that's funny because we actually landed in one of his church plants as
Yeah, he was
well,
in
when we came
Columbia for a
back, and
little while.
he's yeah,
Yeah, I was
yeah,
listening
I'm
to a
very
Bible study
familiar,
that they
very
were
familiar.
doing online just because I was like, "What is he doing these days?" Because we aren't even at that church anymore, we're somewhere else. And I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh, he's leading this Bible study at this church that he's at, and he's talking with these elders and explaining to these people about how they have been researching the roles of women in the church." And I'm like, "This guy is
Mhm.
how old now?" And he's still, like,
Eh,
curious and wanting and saying, "Here's what we're
yes.
seeing. We may have gotten this
Yeah.
wrong in the past." And I thought,
Mhm.
it made me like there is no perfect person, right? And I don't know, I mean, he's not my pastor or anything, but I thought, "Oh my goodness, if we could all hold on to that, like,
Mm.
what have I gotten wrong maybe? Who can I learn from?
Yeah.
What can I hold loosely And I
Mm.
think that's been one of the things that's been really, really helpful for my faith journey, seeing people like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, what's giving you hope? How for you, like, you moved out of a really, lots of rules, lots of legalism.
Mhm.
Like, what are your not like, do you have a do you are you in this, like, "I'm a Creole Christian. This is where I stand. I'm gonna hold this tightly, I hold this loosely." Like,
Uh-huh.
how does that feel for you, like, as you've shifted and, like, where are you right now? I'm not asking you to tell me all your theology, that would be
Yeah. No, no, it's no problem at all, and honestly, I identify a lot with Rubel Shelley. He has what I love about him is that he has for decades been willing to sit on the fringes of a faith community that is very uncomfortable with his curiosity. And uh, we as a society in the United States have a premium on our culture lends itself to wanting direct answers and to have perfected our understanding of certain things. We love knowledge. It sounds a lot like the Greco
yes.
Roman times in many ways, right? And so, how does God want to disrupt our understanding of perfect theology and continue to blow our minds with how big he is, how good he is, how he pursues us, and how he pursues our neighbors? I want to stay in a place where I continue to be amazed by that. And the more that I perfect my theology and a list of doctrine, the less I remain curious about who God is and what he has to show me. And that to me feels really dangerous and a place that I wanted to move away from. And so I think that's where I'm sitting where I am now. Has it caused me to lose a lot of relationships with people that I cared deeply about because I've been cut out of their social circles? Yes. Um, and not all people are comfortable asking those questions, and that is unfortunate, but that is real. Um, but to me, and as we raise our children, this was a question that my husband and I asked as we figured out what church was going to look like for us and how we were going to keep conversations about God alive in our home is how do we encourage our kids to keep seeking even into adulthood to where they're not like me, where I had my entire Bible color coded by the steps of salvation by the time
Yes.
I was 12 and was convinced that I could take someone from creation to Christ in 30 minutes and get them into a baptistry and be done. Like that way of thinking had to be undone, for me to continue to experience a God that is new every morning and still the same yesterday and today and tomorrow. But he is he is so exciting to me, and he's taught me time and time again that I still have so much to learn. So I just want to position myself in a place where I allow him to be as big as he truly is, where I'm not making plans for my church or for my next year saying, God, this is what I want to do. Could you please bless it? But I'm saying, God, what are you doing? And how can I not be
Yeah.
working against you in that? And when I shifted that way of thinking, man, my life just really did explode in richness because his wisdom is so far above mine that I I've just been humbled time and again, and um, it's been a reframe that has helped me more than anything. So, yeah, if you ask me about my theology, it's not a list of things other than my non-negotiables, which are God is so good. He is ever present and pursuing us, and He has good things for everyone everywhere if they can receive Him and hear about Him in a way that is not judgmental and very loving. Sometimes He's going to ask us to do hard things, and His judgment is harsh on us at times, as but it's
Yeah.
also an invitation, right? It's an invitation to something deeper and something better. I want to do my part to not get in the way of that invitation to someone else. And it seems that the fastest way that I could keep people from experiencing that is by judging them. And so I want to just make sure that my faith forward theology is warm and inviting, and only harsh when God is inviting that into someone's life and they
Mhm.
ask for wisdom. So
I
that's
appreciate
where I'm
that.
sitting
I
now.
would aspire to that. I feel like I could tend to be harsh. You feel like when you've learned something new, it can be hard to be patient with those that aren't there, aren't where you are, and you forget
Yeah.
the patience that people had with you when they were a step in a
Oh
different
my goodness,
place.
yes.
I recently had a conversation with Tracy Rhodes. So my dog is like walking around here. She's obsessed with me, and it would be terrible if
Hi,
I
pup.
had her outside. She would just be barking and scratching at the door. So she's just going to be walking around. Um, I had Tracy Rhodes on the podcast, and she said one of the best things she thinks people could do when they are feeling discouraged or like really frustrated in their church experience, is to look at all the different expressions of faith in the world. There are
Mm,
so many. And she said she has
mhm.
sat in on a Quaker gathering and it had a friend sit with her and explain to her what was happening in, like a Greek Orthodox church, and not to come as somebody that's
Mhm.
just like watching, but like, how are they experiencing God and what have I missed? And it was just really beautiful to
Yeah.
hear her talk about it and talk about that experience of learning and being like, oh, I wrote out all these people before. I thought this one denomination had it all figured
Exactly.
out, but it turns out maybe we don't have it all figured out. I thought it was beautiful. So
I plus one that. I mean, that has absolutely been my experience as well, and like I shared earlier, it's sitting in the global church, looking at how other people are finding hope in God and saying, "Wow, there are a lot of ways that people need to be saved. There are a lot of areas of the world where people need hope, and I
yeah.
don't have the solution for hope to everyone. So how are they finding that, and how can I rejoice that God is the solution for them in that, in a way that I could have never even
Yes.
considered. I could have never written it, and instead of just beating myself up for not having that as a part of my theology, how can I sit in that and say, wow, God, you are so good that you are perfect in the way that you pursue your people.
Yeah.
Teach me more
But I think
about
there
that.
is sort of what is the word? Like the pressure is off when you come to that feeling of
Yeah.
understanding. Like I was living like I needed to have all the right answers in order to be good with God. When
Mhm.
when I really think about that, I can't imagine that God would be like, "Well, you got A and B right, but you weren't quite on about the predestination, you know,
Mhm.
Calvinism,
Mhm. Mhm.
Arminianism
Mhm.
debate. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
you're out." I can't imagine that.
Exactly, and I lived 25 years of my life thinking that that's what Judgment Day was going to look like, and it was a really hard place to be, wondering every day if I had messed up in a way that was not going to be forgivable. And there's so much liberation. Christ didn't come to burden us with. Can you imagine if he had given up everything,
Yeah.
even separation from God by taking on all of our sin, just so that we could hold our nose just right and dip our pinky in blood and of a dove?
Yeah.
Like that wasn't working. And he came to perfect good news. He came to perfect good news. And the gospel wasn't good news for me because I was constantly wondering if I was going to be able to attain salvation. And I had put such a premium on salvation that I had
Oh,
forgotten about
man, that's a
sanctification.
word. There's a podcast episode
Like
for you.
the the process,
Yeah.
right? The process of being sanctified should be much
Yeah.
higher to us than a one and done moment
Mhm.
of salvation. So yeah, I want to live the rest of my life leaning into that
Yeah.
sanctification
I
process.
love the humility you hold things with, but I also love the fire that you have in you about the things that you are passionate about. And so I sent you this link to this thread by Shannon Martin. You know who she is.
Mhm.
And I feel like
I
it
do. I love
preaches
Shannon.
I feel like this could preach to some of your heart too, of the things that fire you up. I'm gonna read the thread. I had shared it with Emily Snook on the podcast with some of my patrons the other day, but I just wanted to share. She says white evangelicals
Great.
10 out of 10 prefer what they can't see to what they can see, and it shows. And she shares this thread. And I want to talk about this because I have been this person. I don't want to just point the finger and say
Sure.
it's all y'all's fault. This has been me. So she says there are people being oppressed,
Right.
dying from racism, homophobia, gun violence, and poverty, and they'd rather talk about the end times. Yep. 5-year-olds are being shot to death
Mm-hmm.
during circle time. They'd rather talk about the unborn. An insurrection took place on live TV,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd rather talk about a riot they heard about from Sean Hannity. While COVID deaths were stacking up in hospital hallways, they wanted to talk about Wayfair cabinets and rumors of satanic cabals. We have broken healthcare, broken schools,
Mm-hmm.
cities without safe drinking water, mass incarceration, modern slavery, and they want to talk about focusing on joy, daily quiet time, not being divisive, and Israel. And 90% do not know why they're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to throw this last one around, the Israel one. And she said it was
Mm-hmm.
only a
Mm-hmm.
matter of time that someone would wake up and walk towards what was always right in front of our faces. Let's talk about that. I
Yeah.
have been the person that was like, we had the books in our house growing up, like the 86 Reasons Christ is Returning in 1986. I'm like, it was like one of these 3 days, right? It was sometime in September because we don't know the exact day, but we could like narrow it down to one of these 3 days. And yes, like, we've cared about the unborn, but I wonder, like, how
Mm-hmm.
have you processed some of this? How have you been able to engage people that maybe have been blind to some of those real things and have hung on to more of those like out there, maybe even not real things? Because I mean, you have a husband who is a physician, so you've dealt with some of those
Mm-hmm.
things. You have been in the political world, the faith world, all of the things. How have
Mm-hmm.
you had some of these
Mm-hmm.
conversations? How does this resonate? Like, wherever you want to
Yeah.
go with this.
I'm going to give you I'll start with a scientific approach, a historical approach, because that really does help me understand where people are coming from. If I can look at the history and the background of how they got to where that they are, I tend to be able to approach those conversations with a lot more grace
Yeah.
and patience. So this is not, I cannot take credit for this. This is actually from the dean of the College of Bible at Lipscomb University, Leonard Allen, and he wrote a book called The Cruciform Church, but he framed it in the context of the Restoration Movement, okay, and how the Restoration Movement was born during a time when science was becoming new and exciting. The explosion of technology and understanding of how, when we discovered the smallest cell, like when we discovered the smallest unit of an atom in a cell, suddenly we could explore so many things about science that we had never been able to describe before. So if scientists were able to give understanding and shed light on the pieces of the human body and how things worked and provide answers, that that impacted the faith community as well, because we had to be able to then give answers for
Mm.
everything that we believe in why. And so much of how we approach faith is because of how we
Wow, that's
approach
interesting.
science and learning. And so you watch over the last 200 years in the United States, after so many of the churches were born out of the Restoration Movement and wanting to perfect our faith, right? We lost a lot of the wonder and the mysticism about God because we were so busy looking at scripture, dissecting it, and saying, yes, we know that scripture says X, Y, and Z. We can point to these three verses and say, that homosexuality is wrong and that women have to be silent. And clearly scripture says this. And so we make this set of rules and doctrine. And if anyone questions us on it, we go back to the Bible as perfect and infallible. And I think that foundation has robbed us of our curiosity about God and who he is as a person, because we've looked so much to a set of rules to be able to look to our left or right and say, yes, I'm saved, or no, I'm not. And we could talk for a whole nother episode about the infallibility of scripture and those doctrines that we could poke holes in all day long because of contextualizing scripture, and even and how translations have been have been a bit shaded by culture, right? So that's a whole nother conversation. So don't hear me saying that those are the doctrines that I stick to. That's just kind of a picture of how we look at a certain list of how to be a good person or how to be a good Christian, and that has been so impacted by our politics that we have tacked those political stances onto our
Mhm.
biblical doctrines. all of those of which could have holes poked in them all day long, right? Because going back to what I said earlier, people are so dynamic, and the
Yeah.
way that they encounter God is so dynamic. And so, yes, I love Shannon, and I appreciate the fire that she brings to things as well, because we've lost our focus when we think that we can vote a certain way, vote down a ticket on a certain political party, or take a certain topic and be 100% aligned with that issue, because there's not a single social issue
Yeah.
that is black and white. And there's not a single way to vote that is
Mhm.
perfect, right? And it's easier. We don't have to think when we do that. We just say, this is where I am on it. And if you're not on my
Yeah.
side, then you're not on God's side. But I just don't believe that God is going to send all Republicans or all Democrats to hell one day. I just think that that's not how he chooses to love us or pursue us. So
Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah.
do that.